Bible study, discussions, commentary, and more. This is The Christian Road with A.K. Richardson.
Please hear and learn.
It's Saturday, July 20th. Thanks for watching. If you're in the side chat, thanks for being a part of the program. Comments, disagreements, all these things are welcome. In fact, they're encouraged. So tonight, we're going to talk about Bill Maher. Now, Bill Maher is a very well-known atheist, although he's more well-known as a talk show host. He's a political commentator. He's kind of a comedian who's a political commentator. And he's been more popular than ever, I would say, here lately because of the political movement of the Democrats and the left have gone so far to the left that he's starting to say a lot of things that are very popular with the conservative groups of the country. And so I decided to review some of the comments he made as of late because of that, because a lot of commentators on the conservative side of things have taken a liking to him. And listen, I mean, it's not about, I'm not saying that I don't like some of the things he says, but he's hard to listen to, number one, because he's got a very big potty mouth. And, of course, he's an atheist, so we would kind of expect this. Actually, there are professed Christians who have some potty mouth, too. You know, I like listening to Ben Shapiro and even Matt Walsh. They like to throw out the F word here and there, or at least the S word occasionally, too. But it's one thing, they throw it out occasionally. But, you know, if you listen to someone like Bill Maher, you know, you're going to hear a lot of stuff that you don't want to hear. But nevertheless, I'm going to play a clip from him talking about the attempted assassination of Donald Trump and the religious claims that are being made concerning it. But I've taken the clip, and hopefully the audio and the video will work. You know, we've been having trouble here lately. But I've taken the clip and I've edited out several of the words that I have no interest in hearing. And I've edited out some of the long laughter and applause for time's sake. So Bill Maher, as an atheist, I mean, no doubt, right? He's going to see all the religious claims that I have talked about as of late and think that they're pretty foolish. So I wanted to give my thoughts. Now, I'm going to warn you ahead of time that there's not a whole lot of intellectual substance here. It's not like we're doing a review of Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins. We're not doing a review of, you know, some Christopher Hitchens video where you're an intellectual atheist who's given some intellectual claim. And even some of those don't give very substantive. You know, Richard Dawkins is always overrated in my book. The guy doesn't know a whole lot. He's not giving very intellectual arguments. But nevertheless. So, expected. Bill Maher is not going to be giving you a lot of high, sophisticated intellectual arguments. But I chose it because, again, he's become very popular even with a lot of people of conservative mindsets. At least politically speaking. But, you know, when it comes to his criticisms of God, the Bible, there's not a whole lot there. It's very shallow. Understood. Okay, let's lay that from the beginning. I'm not claiming that he has a lot of credibility as a philosopher. He certainly doesn't. I'm not claiming that he has a lot of strong arguments worth tearing apart. He doesn't. Just because he's gained a lot of popularity with a lot of people on the right. And I'm not saying that a lot of the things he say. Listen, even when it comes to a man who's liberal and atheist, he has a lot of heavy criticisms of those pushing this child gender-affirming surgery stuff like this. You know, these drag shows for children, pushing this stuff on children. He's got a lot of criticisms of that. So he's making a lot of sense. But that's just because, I mean, he's just making typical sense. We're in a society where a lot of those where a lot of the people on his side are saying so much absurd, ridiculous nonsense that what he's saying sounds good, and you're amening a lot of it. So I'll give him credit where credit is due. He's saying a lot of good things. And the reason a lot of people are picking up on him is because he's not a Republican, he's not a conservative, he's a liberal. He's a Democrat politically. But this isn't a political perspective, and this isn't a political... I'm not coming at this from a political mindset here, of course. I'm coming at this from someone who has something to say about his criticisms of the religious claims. Now, I'm also going to tell you this. Now, I'm going to have some criticisms of myself. I'm going to be pointing out some of the flaws in Bill Maher's thinking, and they're easy to spot because, again, he is not some sophisticated defender of atheism. He's got some things in here that are somewhat fair. Not even somewhat. I'm just going to say Bill Maher has some points in here that are not off topic. In fact, they line up with some of the things that I said in the latest video that I put out about being fair-minded and having a more accurate biblical perspective of some of the claims that we're making if we're Christian, as opposed to what a lot of people out there are making from a religious perspective. So he's got some fair points, but he's got some of these pretty ignorant statements as well. So we're going to listen to this. Now, I'm going to tell you, you're going to hear a kind of a clicking, a dull clicking sound that sometimes comes up. I don't know why it does in some of when I take these things and play them for you. And as of late, if you've been watching, you know that when I play a video, stuff starts to lag. I don't know why it is. I guess my computer's just getting old. So you're going to have to bear with me, but let me know what you're seeing and what you're hearing because that helps me out, especially if you don't hear anything. All right, so once again, this is Bill Maher on his talk show, Real Time, and we're going to listen.
And finally, new rule, there's nothing on earth, not even an assassination attempt, that can't be made just a little worse by adding religion. Since the bullet that was meant for Donald Trump missed him last Saturday, Republicans have been indulging in of magical thinking, saying things like, Trump wears the armor of God. Boxing star Jake Paul tweeted about the miracle at Butler Farm Showgrounds. When you try and kill God's angels and saviors of the world, it just makes them bigger. Which sounds like something a guy who gets hit in the head for a living would say.
Now, of course, as an atheist and someone who hasn't really thought through these things very well, now I'm sure he would claim to the contrary. He's probably did a lot of thinking. But I've never heard Bill Maher pose a sophisticated, well-thought-out argument. It's usually just attacks on absurd religious things that he sees. We'll get more into that here in a minute. Did I get a Trump Bible? No, I didn't get a Trump Bible. I probably won't, but I probably should, right? The Trump Bibles are pretty good, probably pretty good, maybe even the best. It's an inside joke if you know. But no, I probably won't get a Trump Bible. I got one of the best Bibles I've ever had. But anyway, maybe more of that at the end. So, but nevertheless, so it's easy for him to make fun of, and most of the things he's going to say come from. It's not an intellectual argument or an intellectual criticism. It's just comedic sarcasm. That's really all it is. I mean, so there's not much depth. It's just a line at humor for those who are already on his side to get a chuckle. But someone like us, someone who's thought about these things quite a bit, or I'm not going to say that's it. But of course, he's just doing comedy. But I do want to say, as I've already said, I do have a response. Now, he said early on there that magical thinking, and he's going to say something about magic the quote-unquote magic of religion later on, too. But, I'm going to say something about this. Two things. First, it doesn't help that a lot of the claims being made are unsupported, mythical-sounding propositions. Now, this gets into what I have said before. All this talk about Trump being chosen by God or God being on his side, God saving him, how much God intervened, as I have, you go back and watch the video I already did, the latest one, titled, Did God Save Trump? A lot of these claims cannot be proven because, and this is going to have a lot to do with what Bill Maher is saying, because unless God tells you, you cannot know for certain. Whether God intervened or whether God simply permitted what was going to happen. The guy was already going to miss, and God permitted it and didn't do anything, which again was by his grace, Trump being saved, because he allows him to be saved. Or if God actually intervened and allowed Trump to be saved or simply caused the bullet to miss some way, sending an angel, doing some other means, we just simply cannot know because God has not told us. And so all of these overconfident statements that God has certainly chosen Trump, that he's saving Trump, well, we have to be much more reserved on these things. Because if they are not true, and I said this, Trump ends up actually getting killed, certainly hope that doesn't happen, or doesn't win the election, whether they cheat, the other side, or not, it's going to cause a lot of religious confusion. And it's going to cause a lot of people like Trump, I mean not Trump, but Bill Maher here to say, told you so. It's going to cause a lot of people who are already skeptical, a lot of non-religious people, to feel validated in their criticisms. It is one thing to say, thank God that Trump has been spared. By God's grace, he has been spared. Maybe God is, trying to, maybe God wants him in the White House. Maybe. Stressing maybe. It's one thing to say things like this. God can certainly get credit for the fact that Donald Trump was not killed last Saturday. But these other statements, that he certainly has intervened, that he saved him, that he's on his side, and all these pictures, which Bill Maher himself will criticize, about an angel protecting him, Jesus with his hands on Trump's shoulders, it is saying too much because God has not told us that these are the things that he's doing. And you run the risk of what I've already just said when you make these kinds of statements without support. So it's easy for Bill Maher to come around and make these kinds of criticisms. And some of these bogus ones, now like Jake Paul, who's not a religious man at all, or I should say, I don't know very much about him. But what little I know, he's no exemplar of, Christianity. He doesn't certainly come at this, and just like a lot of these politicians, have very little Bible knowledge. And this isn't some strong rebuke, but it's simply to put things in perspective that a lot of people, a lot of the politicians and celebrities making these claims themselves know very little about God. Not even to say that that any of them aren't Christian. That's not even my point. But a lot of them have very little Bible knowledge, and that's how you have a knowledge about God. And it's not having a good biblical foundation of your understanding of God that causes you to make a lot of these overly confident claims. Like this one. Sure enough, when you try and kill God's angels and saviors of the world, well, calling a politician a savior of the world, let alone an angel, is to say way too much. Trump could get in there for 4 years, do a lot of good, and then after 4 years, a Democrat get back in there and undo everything he's done. The presidents only do so much. Now, if it's God's will for Trump's policies first of all, for him to get in the office, and for his policies to have an abiding effect, well, that's God's prerogative. But we don't know that. I mean, Trump got in there the first time and then lost it the second time. And if you had a stronger Democratic candidate, he might not be looking as good as he is to get in there a second time. And who knows? I don't know. If Biden drops out and somebody popular gets in, and then Trump's got a challenger, an opportunity to lose. See, we just don't know. And to make these kinds of statements is irresponsible. Of course, Jake Paul, I have no high expectations. I'm just putting things into perspective. Now, here's the second thing I'm going to say. This claim about magic. Bill Maher calls it magic, and later he's going to make this label of magic about religion in general. This is primarily the thing I want to say. Magic? The idea of religion being magic? Well, the idea that there is a God and that God might intervene, that God might do and work his will and might save certain people that he wants to save. The idea of that being magic in general. The idea, and atheists say these kinds of things, and it's not a well thought out argument. God, fairy tale stuff, magic, they might say. Bill Maher certainly thinks of the idea of God being magic. But it's always a fascinating statement. And if I was having a conversation with Bill Maher, and other people have said this, it didn't originate with me. But I have to tell you, and this is what I'd say. I say, Bill, have you thought this out? Atheism is worse than magic. In magic, the quintessential concept of magic is the magician who pulls the rabbit out of the hat. Atheism is worse than magic. Atheism is more stupid than magic. Because in atheism, the rabbit pulls himself out of the hat. You don't have the magician. So you haven't one-upped magic. If the concept of God is magic, atheism is worse. Now, the concept of a rabbit pulling himself out is worse, more absurd, harder to believe. So you didn't do yourself any favor there by calling it magic. If the things to do with God are magic, atheism is worse. And I would be quicker to believe in a man being able to magically pull a rabbit out of a hat than the rabbit pulling himself out of the hat. A rabbit, I've said this before, but a rabbit pulling himself out of the hat is something from Looney Tunes. You might see Bugs Bunny pulling himself out of a hat. In Looney Tunes, you have all kinds of nonsensical scenarios where the laws of physics don't exist and contradictory, nonsense things. I can imagine Bugs Bunny pulling himself out of a hat. So if the concept of God doing supernatural things or providential things in the world is magic, then atheism is Looney Tunes. That's what you got, Bill Maher. You got Looney Tunes. Atheism is worse than magic. It's harder to believe in magic because your whole philosophy is founded on an assumption that is bogus and easily disproved by everyday observable and repeatable science. Observational science tells you that life originates from life. And that's repeatable. And science can't show you the opposite. But this whole atheistic mindset, especially the atheistic evolutionary mindset, presupposes something that not only has never been proven, but disproven time and time again, and can be repeatedly. This assumption, this presupposition that life originates from non-life, when it is repeatably demonstrable that life originates from life. Your philosophy, your world view, Bill Maher, is much harder to believe. Much less credible. And as I've already said, if if my worldview is magic to you, then yours is Looney Tunes to me. So there's that. Let's move on. Okay, so you bought the LSB. I'm glad to know that you like it. I like it a lot. It's my favorite. Is it perfect? No, which translation it is. But we'll talk about that perhaps if I have time later. But I'm glad that you're checking it out. Rachel says, isn't this the clown that hates God's grace? I don't know if you're talking about me or if you're talking about Bill Maher. So you have to I kind of suspect you're talking about me. It could be wrong, but I'll let you clarify. Yeah, atheism says organic molecules originate from lightning strikes. Yeah, lightning struck a pool of morbid fluid, and presto. That sounds like magic. But then the origination of the universe, of course, is Looney Tunes. Oh, by the way, yeah, I saw that Leighton Flowers, Soteriology 101, did a show similar to what I did, I suppose, entitled anyway, that Did God Save Donald Trump or something like that. I didn't watch that. So I don't know what he said, and he probably focused on a perspective of non-Calvinism versus Calvinism, but I'm wondering if he said similar things that I did.
Internet quickly filled up with images of angels and Jesus protecting Trump, like this one from Congresswoman Maria Salazar.
Which is one, I showed that same post and talked about it.
Steve Scalise said, yesterday there were miracles, and I think the hand of God was there too. Steve was also shot, but God was having an off day.
So if you don't know, Steve Scalise, who, I forget his position, he was a part of Congress. I don't think he was a congressman. Somebody can correct me. But he was the House Whip or something like that. And there were several people from Congress and him at a baseball game, a bunch of Republicans, and someone went and shot up a bunch of Republicans. He got shot, was more injured than Trump was. This was some time ago. But this was political violence against him. And so Donald Trump's, Bill Maher's comment was, well, he got shot too. I guess God was having an off day. Well, his criticism comes from an ignorance about how to rightly see a lot of the faulty things and claims that are being made by a lot of Christians. And this gets into the problem that I talked about on my latest program that you run into. It may be the case in any given circumstance, and it may be the case with Donald Trump, that God has some particular purpose that he's working out through Trump or somebody else perhaps, that he's keeping them alive. Which doesn't necessarily say anything specific, even if he is, because we wouldn't know what purpose he has in keeping them alive. Remember, God can even keep people that he doesn't like. He can even keep wicked people alive to work out his purpose. That's what he does with Pharaoh. God specifically tells Pharaoh in the book of Genesis that he keeps him, or Exodus rather, that he kept him alive. He could have wiped him out by now, and Egypt with him. He says, but I've kept you alive to work out my purpose. Well, Pharaoh was a wicked and rebel, a wicked man and a rebel against God. So even wicked people, God may spare their life in order to work out his purposes. And we know the particular purpose that God had with Pharaoh because God tells us in the book of Exodus. And he told Moses, the prophet. But when we're making all these kinds of claims, well, this guy survived, and I think that must mean that God is protecting him. The problem is, you got people like Bill Maher who don't know how to distinguish these things as overconfident things that God has not said. And what it comes down to is, how do you know when one person dies that God wasn't working out his purpose and one person lives he was? It could be the fact that even when one person dies, God is working his purpose through the death of that person. And God has every right to do it. God says in Ezekiel 18, all souls are mine. See, God can take you from this world, and he could take the righteous just as he could take the wicked. And what criticism? Now, Bill Maher may not like God taking somebody, killing somebody, even if it's a righteous person, even if it's a child. But what criticism are you going to make? I don't like that. What injustice are you going to lay at his feet? Because God, all souls, all life belongs to him. He has every right to remove one child or person or wicked person or righteous person from this world as he so chooses. And by the way, removing a person from this life does not in and of itself mean the person is a sinner or condemned to be lost forever. So in the case of a child, I'm not going to get off on this topic too much. If he decides to remove a child from this life, the child is going to live on into eternity. Now, there's a bigger discussion to have there. But my point here is to say that God can do what he chooses to do. And the only criticism that really can be mustered up by somebody like Bill Maher is he doesn't like that. He doesn't think that's good. And if he says it's not right, I would say, on what basis? Considering that life belongs to God. God gives and God can take away. Why is God obligated to keep anybody in this world? So he would have no claim based upon anything substantial. But see, a part of these criticisms from people like Bill Maher is a lot of these people making these claims that, well, if since Donald Trump missed the bullet, especially so close, God's hand must be with him. Well, God's hand may be with him, but you don't know that. You don't know it. What we do know is that by God's grace, Donald Trump survived. We know that much. But we don't know that God intervened. He at least permitted Trump to survive. He could have been intervening from what would otherwise have been fatal for Trump. But we don't know that. And so when you say, certainly, if he was spared, then it implies in some people's minds, well, if they didn't live, well, then God wasn't on their side. Let me put everything in perspective. God works out his purpose. He can take life for his purpose and work his purpose through death, and he can spare life and work out his purpose. Bill Maher wouldn't know how to discern this, and frankly, a lot of these Republicans and a lot of these politicians and a lot of these Christians saying these things don't know how to discern it because they also are Bible illiterate. And that's just the truth of it. If somebody dies, we might be quick, if we don't know much, to say God wasn't on his side. No, somebody dying doesn't mean God was mad at the person, didn't like the person, or that God wasn't on his side. God could be working a great purpose through death. You remember when Jesus was talking about the people that were slaughtered by the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate? He mixed their blood with the sacrifices, the Jews. So this Roman pagan slaughtered these Jewish people, and Jesus says, you think these people were worse sinners because this happened to them? No, I tell you, you all likewise perish if you do not repent. Jesus is saying something specific there. He's saying that just because bad things happen to people doesn't mean they're bad sinners. This could happen to anybody that doesn't repent. You can't necessarily tell by how a person dies or lives what God is doing, unless a prophet comes along and tell you, and there aren't any prophets to tell us. There's plenty who claim to be prophets, but they're not, which is a whole other discussion. Yeah. Concerning Scalise, it was a Republican versus Democratic baseball game. Scalise nearly died. That's right. He nearly died. So Bill Maher is, well, God must have been having an off day because he almost died. No. See, what Bill Maher won't stop and consider is that it may be a lot of claims that are unfounded that are being made about these things. But somebody needs to tell Bill Maher, if he would even listen, and he probably won't. It's not as though God is saying these things. These are people saying these things. But it doesn't mean God is saying these things. These claims can't be founded upon Scripture. See, Bill Maher wants to criticize religion in general, and by that he wants to criticize God. But it's not as if God is saying these things. It's not that these people are saying these things based upon things they see in the Bible. And I do want to find something. I do want to show something. While we're at it, let me pull up this account that I told you about. I think it's pretty significant. I want to read it. I didn't realize in the last video that my screen was completely behind me. All right, so this is what Jesus says. Now, we're going to watch more of the video, so stay tuned if you're interested in the video. Just a couple minutes here. But this is what Jesus says. Now at that same time, there was some present who were reporting to him about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mixed with their sacrifices. So they were sacrificing, and Pilate came in there, a Roman pagan, and slaughtered them, mixing and mingling their blood with their own sacrifices. Pretty gruesome. And Jesus answered and said to them, do you think that these Galileans were greater sinners than all other Galileans because they suffered these things? You know what he's asking? Do you think the kind of horrible death that they suffered here indicates that they were greater sinners? In other words, God must have not been on their side, which is kind of the claim that is being said. If Trump survived, God must be on his side. Well, not necessarily. Or it may be the case. Now, I've been making the point that we don't know. Now, the reason people are saying this, of course, is because, well, Donald Trump is a greater cause for the Christian cause. I mean, at least his policies and what he's doing as a candidate for president of the United States is better suited for the Christian cause. Now, of course, not completely. But between the two running, first of all, Republicans in general are better candidates for the Christian mindset and worldview. And Donald Trump, I think, especially so. So between the two, between Biden and Donald Trump would be, understandably so, much more favored if you come from a Christian worldview. And so it's very understandable that a lot of people think, man, God, and because Trump is surviving so much, this is important, because Trump is standing up against so much political attacks against him and even near death. I get why a lot of people are saying that God must be on his side, especially since, like I said, a lot of his policies favor a worldview from Christianity much more than the other guy. So it's understanding, and I do understand where these claims come from. They come from a good spot. But they are, in many cases anyway, at least the ones I've highlighted and the ones Bill Maher highlights, overconfident and unprovable and run risk. Because if what people expect from Trump doesn't happen, he doesn't win, or he does die, God forbid, it's going to create a lot of religious confusion and civil unrest because we have these high expectations that God has not said himself. But Jesus asked the question, so do you think these were greater sinners than the rest because they died like this? Jesus says, I tell you no, but unless you repent, you all likewise perish. Jesus' point is saying, no. You know, it could be righteous people dying. Listen, we know how righteous people have suffered. Righteous people in the Roman Colosseums were fed to lions, suffered gruesome martyrdom through the ages. So that, how you die, does not indicate necessarily whether you're righteous or whether you're not. And a lot of these, I got to say this, a lot of free gracers say, well, you know, you may, if you apostatize, if you become an atheist after being saved, God may kill you, but you're still saved. Well, no, you know, physical death says nothing unless a prophet comes and tells you it does. Because a lot of righteous people suffer physical death. A lot of righteous people. In fact, the Bible says more when it comes to physical death. Actually says it's much more likely to be for the righteous, or it's to be highly expected even for the righteous. And so to claim, well, you may physically die, he may take your life if you're a rebel, an ungodly person, after you were once saved, but you still be saved. Well, that's not a biblical perspective. But nevertheless, I digress. Jesus goes on to say, or do you think that those 18 on whom the tower in Siloam fell and killed them were worse offenders than all the men who lived in Jerusalem? That kind of death, does it indicate they were worse sinners? We don't know much about these events. But Jesus says, I tell you no, but unless you repent, you will all likewise perish. So, dying the way that you die or surviving in and of itself cannot tell you much. And that it's an ignorance of this biblical truth that is the foundation of a lot of these claims made by these political people and these celebrities and these Christians. But they're overconfident. They may be true, but my whole point is you cannot know, and you have to be more guarded and reserved in your claims. We move on.
And that bullet missed his ear and went into his spleen. And of course, it was inevitable that someone named Kevin would tweet this video of a flag from the rally that got twisted up in a wire and said, "It looks like an angel." Look, it's an angel, and it's wearing a flag.
By the way, I did, as I said, edit out some of the words. Now, it is possible I may have missed one. So if you hear one, I warned you ahead of time.
Just like Sarah Palin used to do.
Yeah, so I had responded to some of the comments made, at least by the Marjorie, the Congress lady, that she's extremely confident because of that scene with the flag, that this was an act of God. I say that it could be. Maybe God does want Donald Trump to be president. Maybe it is better for the Christian part of this country. Maybe God is doing something. But these things, and I made this point with signs and these flags, flag looks like an angel. God is not going to speak to you in these extremely ambiguous ways. And so that doesn't tell you anything because coincidences do happen. We'll talk more about that here in a minute.
My point is that Donald Trump, even if you like him, is powerful enough as a past president, a likely future president, and to be perfectly frank, a cult leader. America doesn't need a demigod. From the pharaohs to Julius Caesar to Hirohito, many cultures have tried it, the earthly being who is simultaneously divine, or at least God-ish. And it never turns out well. And look, I'm not anti-religion. Oh, wait, I'm very anti-religion. That's right.
Okay, so this idea about Trump being treated like he's God. Now, number one, the statements that Maher has exhibited that he's got problems with said nothing about Trump being a god. Did not imply it in the least. And very few things that I've seen. But no doubt such a mindset is out there somewhere in the fringe. And as far as this being a cult following, well, again, not necessarily the things that I saw or that Bill Maher exhibited indicate a cult following, but there's definitely a cult following. There are a lot of people there is almost a cult like Trump. Now, I'm not singling any particular individual out. But if Trump can do no wrong, if Trump is flawless in your perspective, and any criticism of Trump gets harsh rebuke from you, you need to think, are you being cult-like? There is a cult-like movement. Now, that's not to say that everybody that supports Trump is in that mentality. But any kind of fringe group that just thinks that he is God's gift or that he is flawless, can do no wrong, cannot see the flaws in him or will not tolerate them. I mean, there's a cult-like following out there. So there's a cult-like following with any politician. And Trump is a very polarizing one, and he's a very Donald Trump is the most famous human being on the face of the planet. He's the most famous human being on the face of the planet, and he's probably the most persecuted at the moment. The most maligned and persecuted. Whether some of those criticisms and problems are his own doing or not, this just remains a fact. There ain't nobody in the world right now more famous than Donald Trump, so there ain't no doubt that there's going to be a cult-like following for him. And it's not good. Everybody needs to be able to look at Donald Trump like anybody else and any other thing with a fair and balanced perspective. And if you're a Christian, and you should be, a biblical perspective. But none of the things that he has shown have implied that Donald Trump is God. Now, some claims out there certainly would have been, but not these. But if there is, and wherever it is, that there is these claims or magnification of Donald Trump that make him more than human, yeah, it's a problem. Hey, Jamie, nice to see you in here. Clint Little says, Maher does not have a starting clue what any nation needs. Absolutely correct. Sin V says, I like and support Trump, but I love my Savior. Yeah, and don't get me wrong. When I talk about a cult-like following, I'm not talking about just simple support of Donald Trump. I mean, I prefer Donald Trump over Biden. I will be much more happier Donald Trump getting into office than Biden. And for all I know, that could turn out for the worse. I mean, you never really know what people can do. Now, I have no real evidence or reasons to believe Donald Trump would end up worse. It could be, but I have no reason. The 4 years that he was president, I think he did pretty good. Made some mistakes, said things he shouldn't have said, did things he shouldn't have done, was his own worst enemy at times, but policy-wise, much better from my worldview than anything else out there. So there's support, but then, yes, there are these fringe movements that are cult-like following. Let me back up.
Perfectly frank, a cult leader. America doesn't need a demi. I'm the guy who made the movie Religulous. Come on.
Yeah, now, so he's going to play some clips from this. He made this movie some time ago, and it says, thinking is disbelieving. Well, again, I would challenge how much thinking Bill Maher has done, how many good answers he's got. For say, how does your worldview account for life arising from non-life? How did you get a universe in the first place? How did you get something from nothing? On and on it goes. Answers that are needed for your worldview. I think atheism has terrible foundations. I think it has not thought out. You could think out, well, sophisticated arguments when you have went past the foundational points, when you have presupposed certain things. But I take you back to the start. I don't think atheistic evolution is well thought out. But again, the problem here is Bill Maher is really a responder to a lot of absurd religion in the world, a lot of religious absurdity and ridiculousness, and a lot of religious claims that are not well thought out themselves. Because let me tell you, there's a lot of, if not most, religious stuff in the world itself is not well representative of the one true God. It's not well thought out. Yeah, that's right. We submit to government insofar as government stays within its jurisdiction and it's not violating God's principles itself. I think Sin V, he probably does think Trump supporters worship him. Well, at least those making religious claims. But so, I don't think Bill Maher has any good answers or well thought out propositions when it comes to atheism. But let's look at some of these things.
And the theme of that movie was, I'm sorry, but religion is stupid and dangerous. And I don't say that in a mean way. It's true. No one thought that movie was mean-spirited. Not even the religious people I interviewed. You also share the name Miranda. Maybe you're Carmen Miranda. Yeah, right. Maybe the second coming of her. You should have fruit on your head instead of fruit in your head.
Now, if I remember correctly, when I looked at some of this and many years ago, this guy claims to be Jesus, something like that. And that's why he makes a statement, instead of fruit in your head, he thinks he's a crazy guy. Yeah, and this guy's absolutely bogus, absurd. But see, here's the problem. Every one of these things, I haven't seen this video, I haven't seen the movie. But all the clips I've seen, with the kind of clips that he shows here, the people and the kind of religion that Maher is skeptical of and critical of is the lame brain kind. It's these religious fringe groups that are not themselves Christian or well thought out at least, the ones that don't have good answers and who themselves kind of ridiculous. The easy targets, in other words. I don't like going myself, when I'm criticizing other views that are contrary to mine, I don't really like going after the easy targets. Sometimes it's fun. Benny Hinn is an easy target. Kenneth Copeland, he's an easy target. And I do like to throw intellectual arrows at him because he says a lot of stupid stuff and a lot of inconsistent stuff and a lot of blasphemous stuff. And he's not really good at defending his own views. So yes, it's easy to look at somebody like Rod Parsley, Michael Give Me Your Money Murdoch, or Benny Hinn and criticize them and chuckle because they're absurd and ridiculous and clowns. But they are easy targets. Joel Osteen, yeah, you need to say something about him here and there. He's kind of an easy target. But I like to also, when I point out some other view besides my own, look at the good people and the people. I like to steel man not straw man, but steel man and get the best of the other views. That's why I go after people like James White. That guy's not stupid. He's good at arguing his perspectives. R.C. Sproul. Many other names. If you look at the people I go after, and if I don't think that they're very good, I'll tell you ahead of time. But that's really all I see from Maher. He had on his program a long, long time ago, one of his other programs, Frank Turek. But even then, didn't give him he has a panel. And when you have more than 3 people, nobody, that's why I don't go on, sometimes I'm invited to go on a panel where you get 4 or 5 people and, hey, okay, well, I appreciate the invitations, but I don't like doing that because when you got that many people, nobody's really getting the opportunity to say much. And you get too many people talking, I don't think it does well. I don't even really like 3 people. I will occasionally do that. I don't like panel discussions. So Frank Turek didn't say much, and I don't think really helped him much. But have William Lane Craig on, and not like multiple people. Just have William Lane Craig. Give yourself some time. Have a discussion with someone like him. Or bring Frank Turek on, have a long discussion with someone like him. Or Stephen Maher, isn't that his name? The guy that was on Joe Rogan and Piers Morgan. Now that guy will blow holes all in stuff that Bill Maher says. Get sophisticated thinkers like that. John Lennox. These people, I don't ever see him talking to these people. I see him talking to people like this. You're going after the easy stuff.
All right, thank you.
Can I come over and give you a hug? I hug everybody, so can I give you a hug? Thanks. You can't do that.
We thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you for being Christ-like and not just Christian. Okay. Hey, my wallet.
Yeah, so I don't know who those people were. I don't know how fringe they were or what the religious ideas were. But, he's criticizing them. And thanks for being Christ-like and not just Christian. Well, part of the problem is a lot of the so-called Christian world has put out a bad name. Think about, I hate to say it, think about the charismatic persuasion of religion. They're some of the most well-known and highly watched part of the so-called Christian world. The TBN crew, the people I talked about earlier, Benny Hinn's and the not even Joel Osteen, but all the faith healers. That's who gets the most notable airtime. You know why? Because they're the most scandalized part of the so-called Christian world. They're the most scandalized part of the name given, at least, to Christ. And that's so unfortunate. And some of the French people that he talks to in this video, they do the same thing. But someone needs to tell Bill Maher, hey, there are plenty of Christians that are actual Christians who are Christ-like. And while it is true that every Christian is flawed, there are many who are actually Christ-like. You go around talking to the fringe groups. And this idea, hey, where's my wallet? Yeah, that's about all you got. Now, he is a comedian. And as I said, he's not some intellectual defender of atheism. But that's the best he's got. He's got these comedic rebukes like that. It doesn't have much substance-wise.
How you doing, Bill? God bless you.
Hi.
Seeing you around. Welcome to our world.
I'm seeing you around.
Yeah, this whole idea, I don't think it does any good for Christianity, any good for the service of Christ. These people that like to go around in Jesus. Now, I don't know the full story of that guy. I don't know why he's dressed up like that. Maybe they were doing a play at the moment. But there's a lot of people, who spend a lot of time looking like Jesus and these kinds of things. I don't think you do any good. But again, this is the kind of people that Bill Maher is going after. Go after someone like Stephen Maher, William Lane Craig. Now, Frank Turek's good. He's good at reaching younger generations, and he's funny, and he speaks at a lower level, which is helpful. But, if you can understand what he's saying, someone like Stephen Maher and William Lane Craig are much better than Frank Turek. I do like Turek, but he's not as good as William Lane Craig, Stephen Maher. The problem with William Lane Craig is he speaks so academically that a lot of people don't follow him, especially young people.
That's the way we need to be with religion. Not condescending, but also...
Well, I don't know that he wasn't condescending. He was making a mockery of these people, and I don't know that they knew that. I don't know if they knew that when he was filming it. Now, I haven't seen the movie. Maybe Bill Maher makes better arguments. I do know of one in particular that he asked about, and I just don't have the time here to address it. But it's not most of what he presents.
It's the 21st century. Enough is enough with interpreting every random event as a DM from heaven.
Now, what I'm about to play for you, he said, do not interpret every random event as a DM, a direct message from heaven. Now, before you listen to what he says, I want to play something that I said on the latest program, and then I want to show you what he says. Now, I did my program before I ever listened to this, and I think, if I remember correctly, I'm not sure when this came out, but probably came out after I did mine. And I'm not saying anything about Bill Maher listening to my program. That's not my point. He certainly didn't. What I'm saying is, notice how I was seeing something that I knew was a possibility and a risk, and sure enough, it's what happens. So, listen to what I said here. The idea about the flag formed an angel, people see, well, it might have followed. It's not impossible for a flag to move in such a way as to show the pattern of an angel. Catholics used to do this thing all the time where one person dropped their ice cream cone on the sidewalk, and it's the pattern of the ice cream melting on the sidewalk looked like the Virgin Mary, and people came, or there was a piece of toast once that the burn marks on it from the toaster formed what looked like Jesus' face, and it just got all kinds of attention. Those things can happen. You can have coincidental things like that. That does not tell you that God has intervened. And God doesn't. If Shannon Herring, who's usually in the side chat and a friend of the program, he said it succinctly earlier in one of the comments. He said, not here, but otherwise, he said, if God did act to save Trump, he doesn't want us to know. If God wants you to know something, he's not going to send it in these possibly vague symbols like the American flag moving in the sign of an angel, because that doesn't communicate much. That's not how God communicates things in the Bible. I mean, when he communicated to people that we read about in the Bible, if he wants you to know, he'll tell you pretty clearly. But, the flag forming what looks like an angel, that's God will be speaking very ambiguously. But it still doesn't communicate anything. Now listen to Bill Maher.
There's a kind of person in this world who loves to see signs in everything, never asking why, if God has something to communicate to us. He doesn't just say it. He's God, for God's sakes. Why show up in a flapjack or a frying pan or a Walmart receipt? And don't get me, statues cry. He makes clouds look like stuff. He puts rainbows in the sky. I mean, not anymore since the gays stole it.
Yeah, so isn't that exactly what I was talking about? That gives credence to these criticisms you hear from people like Bill Maher when we say these kinds of things. I don't say it, but I mean the religious community. Because, yes, a cloud that looks like something, you cannot say that's a sign. A flag that looks like an angel, and Bill Maher himself at least knows that, well, if it's God, why would he be speaking so ambiguously? Why don't he just tell you? Well, the problem is, Bill Maher doesn't stop to think, well, maybe God doesn't actually try to communicate in these ways. Maybe these claims, like signs of a cloud or a sign on a flapjack or a burnt piece of toast or a vanilla ice cream cone that has fallen on the sidewalk. Maybe these aren't God's doing. And it isn't. Because the reality is God has not said that he speaks that way. And if God were to speak in these things, well, he would give you some way to know that he's actually speaking. If God wants us to know something, he'll tell us. Now, I'm not convinced biblically that prophets exist anymore. But when he did want to speak to people things that they needed to know, he would send a prophet. Now, go and look at the last program that I did. I talked about from 1 Corinthians chapter 2 that you can't read God's mind. He has to tell you something. Through a prophet or an apostle. That's what he did with the gospel. Not that I'm saying he does that anymore. We do have, if you want to know what God says, he says it right here. Now, if God is working out things, he will do it in real time. He'll work it out. There are some things we can know. Now, if Trump survived an assassination, then we could at least know that God's will was that he stay alive. Either that maybe not for some purpose, or maybe for some purpose. Because if God wanted him dead, he would be dead. But yes, so to my fellow Christians out there, or are you religious people that make these kinds of claims that, well, it's Jesus on toast? You got to stop saying these things. And I'm sorry, but I see a lot of this in Catholicism. You see these things, it's the Virgin Mary in the sky. Stop it. Stop doing that. You got no biblical basis for claiming these things, and you just make yourself look ridiculous. Because God doesn't speak that way. Stop seeing the Virgin Mary on the patterns on the cow's ribs. Look at the cow's ribs. There's a pattern of the Virgin Mary. It's just a cow. It's a cow. It's not Mary. Okay? You know, the way that the ketchup and mustard splattered on your plate. It's not St. Peter. It's mustard. Okay, so stop doing those things. You're not helping anybody. Because God hasn't said he communicates that way. And if he was, what would he be communicating? And it's the same point Bill Maher is actually making. Why would it be so ambiguous? Why wouldn't God just tell you? The Bible says he would tell you through a prophet if he still spoke through prophets. He's spoken through his Son and his apostles in these last days.
The people who see angels in flags are the same people who saw a cross of steel beams in the rubble of the World Trade Center. Because after he kills you, God likes to leave a calling card, like a serial killer.
Now, once again, yes, you see something like this. There's a cross, and people say it's a sign. It's not a sign. If it was a sign, what would it tell you? Because, you know, signs are actually meant to tell you something. If you're riding down the highway, if you're driving, and you see a sign, and it has some symbol that you've never seen before, and you say, what in the world does that mean? Well, what has it really told you? God is not the author of confusion. So if you saw a cross, and you were to say, well, that must be a sign from God, well, what would it communicate? It doesn't communicate it. A sign that tells you nothing is not a sign for anything. It's a meaningless sign. God is not a worker of futility. So we have to be more careful. You see, we have to stop making these claims and giving credence to some of these claims that are being made by some of our critics. Now, this idea that God, after he's killed you, leaves a sign. Well, this gets into a whole thing that we've talked about. Why does God allow bad things to happen? Because this is a fallen world. God is saving people by bringing them into the kingdom and redeeming them. And the fallen world continues on because he continues to save fallen people. When Christ returns, it's the end of the opportunity of surrender. You know, that's what the gospel is. Jesus invaded the world as planned and set up a kingdom. The kingdom spreads in this fallen world, and the way that it spreads is by enemies and sinners surrendering to the king. That's why God allows the fallen world to continue on. And bad things happen in the fallen world, like 9/11. And even the righteous die because the fallen world continues. Because he's not ending the fallen world yet. He's allowing the fallen world to continue. And the gospel is God's terms of surrender. The gospel is basically saying, submit to Christ and he will redeem you and you will be saved. And even though we continue to die, that's only momentarily. That's only momentary. And when Jesus comes the second time, then he wipes out all who have not submitted the knee, resurrects his saints, and it's a new heaven and new earth where righteousness dwells. There will be no more disease and death. See, he's going to redeem it. But right now, it's the terms of surrender. But that'll make no sense to someone like Bill Maher because he doesn't have a foundation biblically to start with for that even to make sense. That's why he would have to give a lot of time to understand a lot of foundational things. But because he dismisses everything, nothing will make sense.
People see signs because they want to see them. It's why stalkers think Taylor Swift is blinking "marry me" to them in Morse code. But it gets dangerous when the signs make someone think God is on their side.
Steve says, brother, as a man that's just came back to the faith, this is something that I was always telling others. I am of the opinion that God does not have a personal plan for everyone's life. People can choose. I believe the same thing. I believe the Bible teaches that God has an ultimate purpose for everybody, a general purpose, which is that everybody comes into his kingdom, surrenders to him to be saved, to serve him. That's everybody's purpose in life, is to serve Jesus. And a part of that purpose is to tell everybody else about Jesus, to live in love, serve your fellow man, especially your Christian family, and first and foremost God, and get everybody else to come into the kingdom. That's a purpose for everybody. It's a general purpose. But the Bible does not ever teach that he has some specific purpose for some individual that is unique to them, although he may. See, God may have some particular purpose for a particular individual. And if he does, he'll work that out. But this idea that God has a plan for your life, well, he may. And I believe God is personally involved with every Christian. But he doesn't necessarily have some specific special purpose other than he's going to save you and bring you into the new heavens and new earth if you submit to the King. Yeah, Maher has no foundation to understand any of these things.
Republican Congressman Mike Collins said after the shooting, God spared Ronald Reagan for a reason, God spared Donald Trump for a reason, God doesn't miss. Really? Tell that to John Lennon, Lincoln, JFK, RFK, and Martin Luther King. Look, the who shot at Trump was cowardly, unpatriotic, selfish, vile, and weak, and he should rot in hell. But thinking that God protects your heroes, but not mine, that isn't cool either.
Well, again, a lot of this is based upon this assumption that if a person lives or gets shot at and survives, God is on his side. If he doesn't, God is not. Well, that's false. I've already proven that by Jesus' own words. God, you don't know what God is doing. God may be working through somebody's death just as much as he may be working through somebody's escape from death. He may work through somebody's death like he may work through somebody's life. And he may spare the wicked for a purpose just like he may spare the righteous. He may kill or allow to kill or to die the righteous for a purpose just as he may allow to die the wicked. So these things are indicators. So Maher is responding to this assumption that he thinks is inherent, that where he buys, well, if God is real, then these people making these kinds of claims, well, he assumes it true and says, I don't like it. It's bogus. And then he says this, well, just because God saves your heroes and not mine. Well, number one, again, this is based upon a faulty understanding of something that God has never said. But two, I got to say this, even if it were true, Bill Maher, your heroes may not be good people. John Lennon was no influence for good. John Lennon was singing, imagine that there's no heaven above us. And other things about John Lennon. There was nothing good about John Lennon. So maybe John Lennon wasn't a good guy. Now, I'm not saying it was good that he got shot. That's not my point. And I'm not saying that God intervened to have him killed. God may have just simply permitted what was going to happen. And by the way, it need not be said, really, but I'm not one who says everything that happens is God's will. That's Calvinism. But I'm not getting into all that. I touched on it a little bit. And it's probably what Leighton Flower is focused on. But you have to think about it, Bill Maher. Maybe your heroes, and I'm not necessarily saying who is and who isn't. Who did he say? You know, I don't know that any one of these was a bigger force for good. Now, Abraham Lincoln I like, and I think he was for society and for the nation anyway, was a good influence. I think he was good to have around. Martin Luther King had some good things to say, and I don't know, Lenin, I'm not so convinced. But God has not told us that these people died because God was not on their side. So his criticism is based in that assumption, number one. But number two, maybe a lot of the heroes who do die are not good people. And how do you know? Now, for example, we don't know, and I'm not saying I know, but hypothetically, it could be the case. Someone like Abraham Lincoln, that was a force for good in the Civil War and uniting the country, and a good influence and force for against slavery. But maybe other things that Abraham Lincoln would have went on to have done, maybe they would have been bad. We don't know. So maybe it was a good thing that Abraham Lincoln died. I don't know. I'm not saying that it's the case. But I want you to think about this story. I believe it was King Hezekiah. Somebody can correct me, but I think it was King Hezekiah. That it was one of the kings, and God sent the prophet to them, prophet Isaiah, and said, "Get your house in order, you're about to die." And the king turned against his wall, and he wept, and he cried, and he prayed for God to spare his life. And God came back. He said, and as Isaiah was leaving the premises, God said, "Turn around, go tell him I'm giving him 5 more years." So here's a case where God was going to let this man, or maybe even kill him, because everybody's got to die. Everybody's going to die one way or another. And God's saying, "You're about to die. So I'm just giving you a heads up." And the king pleads with God to spare his life, so God gives him 5 more years. We think that's a good thing. But think about this, and marinate on this. His children, one of his children becomes king and becomes one of the most wicked kings that the nation of Judah and Israel had ever seen, which came about because he lived longer. If he had died, his life was already pretty much good, and God gave him a warning. If he had died, it would have been better. God in his mercy spared his life 5 more years, and it didn't turn out well. In this case, we know that God actually giving him longer life turned out for the worse. And we get to see it. And you never know. But you'll never communicate those things to Bill Maher because he's already dismissed so many other things that he would need to make sense of that. So what I'm saying is, even if good people die, maybe it's better that they die because maybe worse things would have went on to happen. We just simply don't know. Or it may be the case that someone who is a hero to Bill Maher may not be a good person.
Who shot at Trump was cowardly, unpatriotic, selfish, vile, and weak, and he should rot in hell. But thinking that God protects your heroes, but not mine, that isn't cool either.
I don't know how to say your name, not even begin to try. But yeah, atheist claim is that the earth starts out as a rock, and then we get everything else. We get all these things. It starts out, a rock forms everything. Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah, it's a big jump from a rock, and then you get water, and then you get life. Yeah, so for me, thinking is disbelieving in atheism. I'm with you on that.
MAGA Nation, because they are religious by nature and given to magical thinking, have been trending towards demigod worship for a while now. The shirts and flags and posters depicting Trump the Redeemer, the crosses and religious imagery that were heavy in the crowd on January 6th.
Yeah, again, there's a lot of religious zeal that is based upon ignorance. You know, that's what Paul the Apostle talked about in Romans 10, he talked about some of the religious leaders. He said they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. So yes, there's a lot of zealous religious people who are posting a lot of these pictures and things and carrying crosses, who are who have a zeal based upon ignorance of God and lack of understanding of God because of a lack of understanding of the Bible, like Bill Maher. But this is where his criticisms are coming from. And yes, Jamie, I would love to have coffee with Bill Maher. If it was not on a show, in his show, he's automatically in defense mode. You got a limited time, you're going to get nowhere. Although I would still do that if he invited me. But you know what? I would love to sit down with him as a person, have some time so that he's not going to be defensive. He may still be defensive, but he's going to be less defensive because he's not in front of a camera and doesn't have to defend himself in his own worldview. I would love to talk with him. He can be rational, just like I would love to sit down with, I would say Joe Biden, but I'm not sure. You know, he seems to have dementia, and I'm not sure I could get anywhere. I would love to sit down with Donald Trump. You have to get him off camera too, because he's also going to be ready to defend himself. But I would like to talk to him about God and the Bible.
But Trump didn't survive the attempt on his life because of divine intervention. He survived because a virgin couldn't hit the fattest president since Taft. And again, make no mistake, I'm glad he couldn't. But Trump is alive because he's the single luckiest who ever lived. His whole life, you want to vote for him? Fine, but don't pray to him. He's already all in on being godlike. He said this week, the doctor at the hospital called it a miracle. I'm not supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be dead. Yeah, so is Dick Cheney, but karma isn't cooperating and karma isn't a thing.
Okay, the statement that I'm supposed to be dead and the doctor calling it a miracle does not imply, either by Trump or by his doctor, that Donald Trump is some god or godlike. So that's a non sequitur. It doesn't necessarily follow. That doesn't imply that, to say that it's a miracle. No, I don't believe it was a miracle. I didn't see anything miraculous, unless you redefine miracle as just merely something rare and amazing. But I don't agree that it was a miracle. It could have been providence, or it could have been simple divine allowance for Trump to live. But Bill Maher doesn't know any. He doesn't know either. So I've said all this to say that, once again, Bill Maher doesn't have a lot of substantive arguments in this little video that he did, or for the most part, he may here and there. But he deals with mostly the fringe groups, the worst, the weakest. He doesn't argue with the most intellectual. Why in the world doesn't he have Stephen Maher on? And why in the world, hey, Bill Maher, here's my recommendation for you. Have William Lane Craig on. Talk with him, not in a panel so that he doesn't get much time to speak. Hey, Bill Maher, if you want, talk with him personally. You don't have to have him on your show if you don't want, but talk with him personally. This is why I wish Jordan Peterson would spend more time with someone like Stephen Maher or William Lane Craig. Or maybe even Frank Turek. But again, I like William Craig better. And Stephen Maher is great. So it's a shame. So a lot of his arguments are not substantive, and they're just comedic digs, you know. That's really all they are. They don't count for much. You'll get an applause from the chorus, but there's nothing deep there. But I did want to address some of these things, and I wanted to give a biblical perspective of it, and a fair and balanced. I'm always trying to be fair and balanced because I'm trying to be biblical. And I believe that being biblical is automatically fair and balanced because being biblical is truth. And that's what this program is about. It's about truth. And as my intro says, this is about commentary. And it's about commentary on religious people, on atheists, on the news. I don't mind doing commentary on the news because it'll be, and what I'm trying to present is a biblical perspective. Well, now, when I said I don't believe in miracles, I didn't say I don't believe in miracles. When I said I don't believe that Trump, surviving a quarter inch away from a bullet, I said I don't believe that's a miracle, and I don't. Here's what I mean, and I said this on my last program. A miracle is so often spoken of as just simply something that is simply amazing, almost rare. People say a child being born is a miracle, or somebody nearly dies but survives, and people say it was a miracle. No, those things happen. A miracle is when an event occurs because something supernatural has happened that is physically impossible. And I don't ever use the term, anymore, a violation of the laws of physics or a suspension of the laws of physics. No, I don't believe the laws of physics have been suspended. I believe it's just simply the laws of physics don't apply to something supernaturally. It's not that they've been suspended, they just don't apply. William Craig talks about this, and I recommend you go and look what he has to say about it. It's that the laws of physics are what will normally happen given a set of physical parameters. But when something supernatural happens, those things about the laws of physics just simply don't apply to that because they only apply to what is given on a normal basis. But nevertheless, there was nothing supernatural about what I saw. People can miss a gunshot. They can fire at somebody and miss. That's not physically impossible. A miracle is when the laws of physics cannot produce, by normal working, a particular event that actually occurs. That's a miracle. Walking on the water, raising the dead. The laws of physics do not have the capacity to produce these things. That's a miracle. Now, it may be providential, God working through things that are not miracles and still getting his will done. But I saw nothing miraculous. I saw nothing that the laws of physics could not produce, even if God was not working. So that's what I meant. Yeah, since we've reached the end of the program, I'm just going to say, yes, I still love the LSB. There's one verse that I don't like, or at least that I can tolerate it, but it's the one that comes the closest to not tolerating. There's a footnote in Acts 2:38 that I don't like in some Bibles. Actually, the footnote is not in mine, but I still love it. It was produced by the Master Seminary, which is the seminary that John MacArthur runs. But you know what? They did a great job, and I believe John MacArthur and the Master Seminary, and he only made certain decisions that were rare, and when they couldn't come to an agreement themselves, but he didn't have a lot of input in the translation. But it's a great Bible. It really is. I try to get those guys on so I can interview them. They probably suspect that I would criticize them for being Calvinist, but I won't, because I don't see a lot of Calvinism in the Bible. But let me tell you something too. The Bibles that they produce are some of the best that I've ever seen. Now, there is a Calvinist, and we're at the end of the program, which is why I'm going off topic here. And that is my thoughts on the Bill Maher situation. But who's that guy, Jeff something? Who's the Calvinist with the beard? They all got beards. Who's the Calvinist that makes the really fantastic Bibles? Like Jeff something? Somebody say it. Now, you're not going to beat his workmanship. He'll take an old beat-up Bible and he'll redo it. And he's got some of the most amazing binding and leather covers that I've ever seen. It's really a work of art. He does great. Somebody spit his name out there and I will repeat it. But if you're not going to do him, 316 Publishing, they've done some of the most fantastic work. This Bible, it is expensive, so you're going to pay a lot of money. This was a gift to me, actually. Somebody from my congregation chipped in the money as a gift. But the binding on this is so great. And look, it's got these 3 ribbons. And I like the flap, the big flap, because it helps protect the pages. Now, I could have done with bigger print. And I think they've got some now that are bigger print. See, this was wide margin, and I actually don't write a lot. I don't write much of anything. I don't write much notes. I don't ever do scripts. I don't ever write my Bible. I like to memorize. It's just how I am. But I would have preferred if they would have got rid of the wide margin and made the print bigger. That's my only criticism of the. It's still big enough for me to read. And I do like how they've done. I would have preferred paragraph form, but this isn't too bad. But this is a great Bible. I'm talking about the physical Bible. So it's Steadfast Bibles. You can go on 316 Publishing and order these. They've got some less expensive, and I think they've got some even now, like I said, that have bigger print. I ordered one for another lady in my congregation, and it was a pretty good Bible. So I really like this Bible. Of course, I know we were talking about the translation earlier. I love the translation. I got to say, it was really great because for many years, I was wanting a Bible translation that I would be satisfied with. The New King James was okay, but personally, I'm not going to get into the discussion, but personally, I'm not a Textus Receptus guy. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can study this out. I'm a critical text kind of guy, and I'm not a majority text kind of guy. I went through some, and I thought the New American Standard, not the most recent update they did, but I thought the New American Standard, like the 95, 97 edition, or even the 70s edition, I forget now, it's been so long since I've used it. I thought the New American Standard was great. It had some verses that were kind of hard to swallow, like a handful. And I just thought, man, I wish they would have fixed those verses. And for a long time, I was undecided because of those verses. And finally, I decided, well, I guess I'll have to tolerate it. And so I was using the New American Standard for a long time. Well, John MacArthur used the New American Standard, but he evidently wasn't satisfied either with everything in the New American Standard. So he got permission from the Lockman Foundation, which produces the New American Standard, to revise it and update it and use the New American Standard as a basis for their own translation by his own committee at the Master Seminary, and they did a great job. So they used the New American Standard and fixed it. They got rid of the problems that I didn't like. At least they improved them, got rid of those, and I thought, well, great. And some of the other translation policies they had, it's not the New American Standard. It does a lot. It took the New American Standard and just made it leaps and bounds better. And finally, I examined it for a while before they came out with it because they had the New Testament. And I thought, this is great. I love it. Finally, they published it. I got the Bible, and I've been using it ever since. And I've just been happy with it. It's not perfect. I know I want to read the King James. Well, let me tell you something. I grew up on the King James. When I quote a verse by memory, typically I will use the King James. But I'm going to be honest with you. I do not like the King James. I do not recommend it for younger people or for novices or for new converts. You're going to hate me. But I recommend. I would tell people who are new to the faith or young, don't use the King James. It's going to be just a harder road to understanding the Bible for you. I know you're not going to like that, but that's what I tell people. I want to hear the heresy they speak of Acts. I don't know what you mean. Okay, so any further last comments on the Bill Maher thing? Or what we're talking about, or something else before we go? You don't like it, but you love me. Hey, I love you too. And I appreciate you being able to take such a strong disagreement. Because the King James guys, a lot of you I know are passionate, but you're not one of those who will call me a heretic because I don't use it. So I appreciate that about you. Well, the King James language translation is beautiful. There ain't no doubt about it, but it's just so antiquated. But you know, I still don't mind like the Proverbs and Psalms, or at least Psalms, if they still left in some of the old style, because it's poetry. I wouldn't mind that a bit. Yeah, I appreciate you guys joining the program. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to share this information because it goes a long way. The more you guys share these videos, the more you guys share them on your Facebook, share them on YouTube, Instagram. I barely ever use. I don't even know much about Instagram. I don't even know enough to use it. I use it like occasionally. I try to go post on like Twitter, and I'm always going to call it Twitter, not X. I'm happy you found the program, Chris. Keep watching, even if you disagree. That's what this program is about, is just exchanging these things. Like and subscribe, share the information, because that's what gets us on the search results. And, at the least, if you don't agree with everything I say, I try to present a fair and balanced look. And you guys know, if you guys watch me, you know that even if I disagree with somebody, I try my best to present the best of what they got. I try to steel man my opponent. I think you guys would admit that. That's what I think that I do. That's what I try to do. So, if you post to more platforms, well, I do Facebook, I do Twitter. I think on Instagram, you always got to post a picture, which I like to just do links. But what platforms are you talking about? I mean, I'm all ears. What should I do? I probably could find out. TikTok? I despise TikTok just from what I know people are doing with it, and the whole. I don't know much about TikTok except for there's a lot of brainless garbage on it. But now, to be fair, there's brainless garbage on Twitter and other stuff. Yeah, I do need to make shorter videos and shorts from my long. I do need to do that, but I just don't have the time, to be honest with you. But nevertheless, all right. You know I love you guys, and even if we disagree, marinate on the things I've said. If you're an atheist, I hope you will marinate on the things I've said. But God bless, and good night.